Hi there, I'm Lee Bagshaw from Simmonds Stewart, and thanks for joining our VC term sheet deep dive, where we look through a typical Series A term sheet for raising capital in Southeast Asia. And as always, if you want to follow the term sheet which we've marked up, which goes along with this video, click on the link below and you can download that document. We've also got some terrific resources on our website at www.simmondstewart.com, where you can learn more about capital raising and download guides and templates. Okay, so this is video number 7, and I'm going to talk about the parts of the term sheet which cover restrictions on the founders, and specifically on restrictions on the founders' shares. So the first thing you'll probably see in the term sheet is a lock-in on founders selling shares, i.e. an absolute restriction on you as a founder selling your shares for a period of time. And sometimes this might be set at 3 or 4 years. And it is, it can be particularly kind of odd to see such a thing when you've been working in your own company for a period and then you find that you can't sell any of your shares for a period of time. But it's not unusual for investors to ask for this, and of course the reason they're asking for it is because they're investing on the basis of the team partly and want you guys to stick around. So what we normally say is ideally try and strike out founder lock-in on the basis that most likely you're going to be also subject to some vesting arrangements, which I'll talk about shortly. If they insist on an absolute lock-in, then obviously try and get the period down to as short a period as possible. But perhaps more likely that you'll have success is adding some kind of carve-out so that you might be able to sell up to 10, 15, 20% of your shares outside of the lock-in. And you might want to do that for personal reasons to get some liquidity in the future, and so it's good to have that flexibility. Now, even if you don't have an absolute lock-in, it's most likely that as a founder you'll be subjected to a vesting arrangement. Now, if you've been running your company for some years before raising any money, it's quite possible that you've already got some concepts of founder vesting agreements in place, where effectively if any one of the founders leaves, then the company has the ability to repurchase those shares or repurchase unvested shares at a certain price to make sure that the equity is held by the key people who are still involved in the business. Now, what often happens on a Series A round, that even if there are existing vesting arrangements, and certainly if there are not, your average Series A investor is going to insist on putting in place vesting arrangements. And the way that these work is that normally for a period of 3 or 4 years, if founders leave the company, then their unvested shares can be repurchased by the company for normally a nominal value, depending on the circumstances as to why they leave. In terms of how to approach this in the term sheet, obviously the obvious thing to try and do is to reduce the vesting period, same principle as a lock-in. And this is particularly important if you've been working in your startup for several years before you've got to this funding round. You may have some justification for saying, well, actually you've earned those shares. So whereas investors, when they present the term sheet, may well ask you to vest 100% of your shares, actually a more sensible compromise, and where you might end up is that maybe 50% of your shares are vested immediately, with the remaining 50% maybe vesting over a period of 3 years. The final thing to say about vesting is that, and this may not necessarily come up in the term sheet, but it's certainly going to come in the final form documents, is this concept of a good leaver and a bad leaver. And this is where lawyers get into great fights and drafting battles as to exactly the circumstances as to why you as a founder might leave the company. So you may not encounter these concepts in the term sheet, but you certainly may do when you get to the final form document. And the point here is that there are different ways by which you as a founder can leave the business, and there are different end results and potentially significant impacts on you as a founder if you leave in circumstances where you might be considered to be or deemed to be a bad leaver. And the reason this is important to bear in mind is that remember that vesting arrangements for founders are not just an issue as between the founders and the investors. They're also an issue as between the founders, because if you find yourself in a position in the future where you potentially have been forced out of your company, maybe for a perceived lack of performance, you don't want to find yourself being on the wrong side of a determination as to whether you're a good leaver or bad leaver, and find yourself losing significant amounts of your equity for nothing, which you've obviously worked for over a period of time. So at term sheet stage, it may be that this concept of good leaver and bad leaver necessarily comes up, but it certainly will in the final form documents, and you'll probably see some discussion on language around cause, i.e. the reason for the departure of you as a founder. Okay, so that's the end of video 7 on restrictions on founders' shares. If you want to keep up to date with our VC term sheet deep dive series, make sure that you click on the link below the video where you can get further information.